Hey there, welcome to the fourth episode of Open Floor. I'm your host, Arya Narayan. Before we begin, please follow us on wherever you get your podcasts, like Spotify, Overcast, and Apple Podcasts. Also, please check out our website at openfloor.me/home and follow us on Instagram at openfloorpodcast. Now, let's get on to the episode. In this episode, we'd like to discuss an issue that has been quite important over the past couple of years in US politics and has only continued to grow in its importance: the criminal justice system. In fact, there are quite a few points of contention regarding the criminal justice system altogether. Perhaps the most controversial issue is that of capital punishment, which is also known as the death penalty. Many argue that it is unfairly applied, is inhumane, and it is ineffective in reducing violent crime. Another issue is that of the cash bail system. In the current system, those charged with a crime are able to post bail in order to stay out of prison before their trial occurs. Further, many debate upon what is known as mandatory minimum sentencing. Currently, judges are required to punish certain offenses with a minimum sentence, regardless of the circumstances of that particular case. Opponents of this argue that it has led to mass incarceration in the United States and it unfairly imprisons people. Finally, private prisons have come under scrutiny. These prisons are run by companies rather than government authorities, and thus they are able to capitalize upon imprisonment. Opponents of this system believe that the financial interests of prison corporations has led to the growth of the mass incarceration in the United States as well. With me today to discuss these issues are Kunal Kapoor and Ishan Chakrabarti, who are both sophomores at Lexington High School. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having.
Thank you for having us.
Now, first of all, which of the criminal justice issues that I just mentioned do you think are the most important for us to consider currently in our climate right now, and why do you think that?
I think that the most important issue among those that you've mentioned are mandatory minimums. While they may not be the ones that are sort of paraded around in the news as much, I think they're the largest contributor to mass incarceration because they force judges to impose very harsh punishments upon prisoners that keeps them in jail and alters a mindset in which we're more focused on punishment rather than rehabilitation.
I agree with Kunal, but I don't really think it's very important for us to rank them necessarily. They're all contributors to mass incarceration, and there's no reason we can't take them all on.
That's a very unique viewpoint, actually, and it's important that even though we're trying to rank them, that they're all important issues and we have to work to solve every single one that we mention. So let's segue into the death penalty. So currently, individuals who are convicted of some serious crimes like multiple murders or espionage in certain states and also at the federal level can be sentenced to the death penalty. Do you think that this should continue? Why or why not?
I don't think that it should continue. I think that the death penalty is essentially just taking out all of the reformative abilities of justice, and is essentially just saying people like you will never be able to be reintegrated back into society, so we can just kill you. And I mean, it's not up to the state to do something like that.
I agree with that. I think that giving the state sort of the ability to decide when to execute someone, a citizen, based on their own laws is tyrannical. It shouldn't be allowed. I also think the death penalty is sort of very inhumane punishment, as giving people the ability, as again, giving the government the ability to sort of kill people alters a focus on rehabilitation, as well as is a very dehumanizing experience for prisoners, as they are sort of seen as already dead. Also, one other thing is that a lot of prosecutors use the death penalty to drive up plea bargaining sentences by threatening death. So I sort of think that it's also a contributor to mass incarceration.
Right, because it increases the amount of people on life without parole.
Now, seeing as you both clearly disagree with the idea of capital punishment, how do you think that we should work to replace it? And why do you think these replacements are better than the death penalty?
Sure. So life without parole is definitely one replacement measure that has been seen a lot, especially in states that have already abolished the death penalty. So I think this is obviously a better option than the death penalty because, like, over anything, it doesn't kill the prisoners. Also, yeah, so during life without parole, people and the prisoners still have agency. They can still sort of live a life, even though it is in prison. And abolishing the death penalty can serve as sort of a first step for focusing on other punitive sort of punishments that exist in the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I agree. I think life without parole or life even with parole, both of these things just taking down the severity of those punishments for those crimes from death to that, even that is just enough.
Okay. So now let's move on to the issue of private prisons, which has definitely come under fire lately. So while the majority of prisons in the United States are government run, a substantial proportion of prisoners are actually held in some private prisons across the country, especially in California and Texas. Now, these prisons are for profit companies, which means they are allowed to gain money from imprisoning people. And do you believe that this is an ethical process?
I think that it's extremely dangerous to attach an incentive to imprisoning people, to attach a profit motive to justice, where when justice should just act on its own and without any kind of, you know, monetary consideration. So then, these things do not go well together, and I think that that's not only a slippery slope, it's extremely dangerous to prison and the integrity of the justice system.
Yeah, I also agree. It creates a sort of perverse incentive to incarcerate as many people as possible when you're attaching sort of motive to catch people. This can be seen like with these private prison companies and their lobbying groups, which can directly help and influence past laws that make crimes more severe or for like slighter offenses, force people to go to prison and whatnot. Obviously, not okay because it just actively focuses on sending people to jail.
So the United States has the largest incarcerated population in the entire world, even larger than countries like China and India, who have much higher populations. And how much of a role do you think that private prisons play in this? And if so, what should be done to change them, to make them more conducive to a more ethical prison system, so to say?
I mean, the question is, uh, even do we have the infrastructure to replace these private prisons? If we've established they're bad, do we have the infrastructure to take the prisoners who are already there and put them in, public, not for-profit prisons? And then that's really a question I don't know the answer to. Um, and so I think private prisons do play an important role in mass incarceration, but whether or not we can replace them immediately and consequently what can be done to change them is is really about infrastructure.
Yeah, I agree. I think sort of making the prison system more ethical sort of relies on the first step of reducing incentives to incarcerate people, as that is inherently unethical. In terms of whether we sort of have, it's like possible to immediately do it, as Ishan was saying, it's sort of a question of infrastructure. But that's obviously no reason why we shouldn't do it, and there are obviously ways or processes that we can go through to make a shift from private prisons to solely governmental run prisons possible.
Yeah, there's actually a push to abolish private prisons, but many believe that it's a hasty step because infrastructure may be lacking in some areas or across the whole country, in fact, and immediately replacing them. So that's a good point that you raised there. Let's move on to bail now. So, because poor individuals may have greater difficulty paying bail when they go into prison, many say that the system is therefore unfair. So there is actually some debate on this, but what do you think about that?
I think the cash bail system is kind of unique to the United States and the Philippines, and in the UK, for example, the bail system essentially works like you have to abide by a certain set of restrictions, and otherwise they're going to ask you to pay. And I think that that's a much better system, but I don't think that the bail system is in this, continuing with the theme of the podcast. I don't think that the current cash bail system is really a big contributor to mass incarceration.
Yeah, so it probably doesn't contribute to mass incarceration because you're sort of only in jail for the period of your trial. So it's not sort of a big deal, but I don't think the system is good in the sense that, well, like, I guess the idea of the premise behind the bail system is sort of to maintain the whole innocent versus innocent until proven guilty idea, which bail system, not giving bail to people just solely based on their wealth or financial status, sort of goes against that, because even though you may be poor, you could still be innocent, but the system sort of doesn't afford you the right to act like someone who's innocent. So the system can also have very disparate impacts on poor, especially minority populations, as they're sort of held in jail because they can't put up bail. A lot of these people live on sort of weekly or monthly paychecks, and not being able to get to their job could get them fired or sort of destroy their financial well-being.
Now, in fact, many people argue that the idea of cash bail compromises the idea of innocent before proven guilty, because those people who are unable to pay bail actually have significantly worse case outcomes, and they're found guilty at a far higher rate than those who are able to pay bail. And that's another reason why people think abolishing the cash bail system could be a good idea. Do you think that this is a step that we should take to eliminate happenings such as these?
So I think that, yeah, we should abolish the cash bail system and sort of replace it with something that's more like, yes, there are restrictions if you are going to go to trial for some offense. But I also think that sort of abolishing the system isn't necessarily going to get rid of people who can't pay bail not going to prison at higher rates, because I don't think necessarily sitting in prison because you weren't able to pay bail is an actual contributor to getting worse results at trial. I think the main contributor is the fact that since they don't have enough money, they're probably assigned with some bad public defender who's like overworked. They're probably not going to get the best defense. They're also probably a minority population, which also makes them more likely to be sent to jail. So I don't think it'll necessarily fix some problems, but it'll still reduce some material suffering.
That's an interesting point again. And other people have contention with bail in the fact that people who are charged with extremely severe crimes like murder or rape, people believe that those kinds of crimes shouldn't, the people who are accused of those kinds of crimes shouldn't be allowed to have bail just because of the severity and the possible danger that they present to society. But otherwise, they believe that the bail system should be continued. Do you think that this is fair?
No, I don't think so, because again, innocent until proven guilty does not matter what the crime is. Any sort of trying to be like, oh, you could have committed murder, so we're going to put you in jail. Again, that just sort of violates that sort of like constitutional right to be innocent until proven guilty, and it shouldn't be afforded. I guess obviously there are other checks to make sure that the person is not a danger in the population, like being monitored or sort of other restrictions, but I don't think violating like a basic rule is the way to go. Otherwise, that rule then has no legitimacy.
So now, with regards to some crimes, such as those concerning drug possession, especially drug possession following the war on drugs, mandatory minimum sentences must be given to those found guilty of a crime, even if judges feel that sentence is excessive, with the specific details of the specific case which they're sentencing. Do you believe that this policy of mandatory minimum sentencing should continue? And what do you think the consequences of this policy are on mass incarceration?
So, as I alluded to earlier, sort of mandatory minimums are a large contributor to mass incarceration because they force the judges to put people into jail for a certain minimum amount of time, which is a lot of the time it's very large and sort of not proportional to what the person did, especially when a lot of judges do not agree with the specifics of the case that someone should be sent in jail for that long. The longer that you send people to jail means that at any given moment there are more likely to be people in jail. Obviously, in the system in which people got out earlier, there'd be less people in jail at any given time, but the opposite is also true. So that's obviously a contributor to mass incarceration. I'm not sure if they should entirely be abolished, but I think that I think that they should definitely be lowered if they exist, and there should be some sort of ability to give deference to judges. for them to sort of deal with the specifics of the case, because if you don't sort of trust the judges who you've appointed to carry out justice properly, they probably shouldn't be a judge. There needs to sort of be more trust per specifics in each case.
Yeah, so I don't think that mandatory minimums should be as high as they are. There should be, just what the name says, minimums, and then we should leave that up to the discretion of judges. Because otherwise we're taking away power from the judges, we're taking away power from the courts and putting it more in the hands of Congress. And I don't think that that's right.
So just to clarify, both of you would be in support of sentence guidance, but not in favor of mandatory minimum sentences.
Yeah.
So I think sentencing guidelines, yeah, they exist sort of regardless. Like, they sort of the approximate ranges for exactly when you should be sentenced. As for abolishing mandatory minimums, I'm not 100% sure we should completely abolish them, just maybe lower them a lot. Like, example for, like, if someone's found convicted of murder, there should probably be a mandatory minimum there, not like up to the judge's discretion. But I definitely think they should be lowered a lot. Possibly abolishing could work. Not sure about that though. I don't think that they should be abolished.
Yeah.
All right, and now, as a great way to wrap up, what other aspect of the criminal justice system that we did not discuss do you think would be a good to change?
I think that there's sort of a lot of, I guess, incarceration or like sort of very retributive type mindset when it comes to drug crimes and drug offenses, sort of stemming back from like the Nixon and Reagan era, like starting the war on drugs, and that sort of led to a lot of racial disparities and nonviolent drug offenders being convicted and clogging up the system, which probably isn't good. Like, example, like the First Step Act, which was passed in 2018, that is like a first step again on kind of tackling those issues. But I think that especially nonviolent drug offenders probably should not be in jail, or if they are, the sentences should be lowered be decently lowered, because it's not really something that's as harmful as the punishment currently says it is.
Well, I think that's a great place to bring our discussion to a close. You guys both made some really good points, and you showed how there's more perspectives on each of the topics we discussed. So thanks again to both Kunal and Ishan for coming on to today's episode.
Thank you.
And with that, I conclude this 4th episode of Open Floor. I hope that today's discussion was as informative for you as it was for me, and is possibly even able to show you some new perspectives on some of these issues. However, we still want to continue this discussion with you guys, the listeners. If you have any thoughts on this episode and the topics discussed, please DM us on Instagram at Open Floor Podcast, or get in touch with us via our website, openfloor.me/home. I also want to thank our wonderful producer, Amin Porgul Mohammed, for producing this episode. We hope you'll tune into the next episode, where we might discuss some recent scientific updates regarding COVID-19, and where we get the experiences of a doctor who's been seeing the effects of this virus every day on the front lines. I'm Aryan Narayan. Until next time, thank you for listening to Open Floor.